Hello, music nerds, fans, and maybe even bands. I'm Ivan, and welcome back to another epic video. This is going to be another discography review of an artist I said I'd do one on a few videos ago. And now that his new album is here, I'm ready to make this video. Today, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite rappers, artists, producers, and all-around brilliant individual, Earl Sweatshirt. This is also my first hip-hop discography review, which feels weird to me since I listen to hip-hop quite a lot. But I'm doing it now, and that's all that matters. It's all that matters. Please stop berating me. So, without any more delay, let's talk about Earl Sweatshirt. Tebe Neruda, forgive me, I'm about to mispronounce our Lord and Savior's name. Go Sile I'm so sorry, guys. Tebe, last name, was born in 1994 in Chicago. Very early on in his life, he would move to Santa Monica, California, and his parents would separate when Tebe was only 8. He started rapping at a pretty young age under the name Sly Tendencies, which is an awesome name, but he would change it to Earl Sweatshirt soon after, which is an even better name. In the late 2000s, Earl would meet Tyler the Creator, who would put Earl on Tyler's debut mixtape, Bastard, in 2009. Tyler would also recruit Earl to be in his rap collective, Odd Future, and in 2010, Earl would release his first mixtape. As I said, in 2010, Earl would release his debut mixtape, Earl, and it features some of his Odd Future colleagues like Tyler the Creator, under some of his different monikers, and Vince Staples. I feel like this mixtape suffers from something that a lot of Tyler's earlier music suffers from as well, that being what I call OED, or Overly Edgy Disorder, not Oxford English Dictionary. Getting the rights to the acronym was a whole hassle. Don't even get me started. Earl shows a lot of talent on this project, but I feel like he focuses way too much on just being offensive instead of just making great songs and rhymes. The project just sounds like a kid trying to make people mad with his lyrics, which makes sense because Earl was only 16 when he released this project. That absolutely blows my mind because he raps his absolute butt off on this thing and shows so much potential and promise. The title track, Earl, has an insane rhyme scheme and some very smart lyricism. This mixtape sounds pretty much identical to an early Tyler project, which also makes sense because Tyler produced it. The beats aren't anything too exciting, but there are still some that I really like. This mixtape is pretty forgettable in my eyes, and it's definitely the Earl project I come back to the least. There are still some cool moments, but in the end, I'm just not a fan of the overly offensive stuff. A few years after Earl, Tebe would release his debut album in 2013 entitled Doris. This album is a vast improvement from Earl. The production and sound quality is just much better. Earl's lyrical content is more varied and interesting. There are features from amazing established artists, and Earl sounds much more mature and grown up. This album is much more diverse than Earl. There are melodic sample-heavy beats, darker beats, more minimalistic beats, and even a couple beats that sound like they're kind of influenced by trap and EDM. Hive is definitely my favorite song on here, and probably my second favorite Earl song, with some insane rapping from Earl alongside Vince Staples and Casey Veggies. Chum is one of Earl's most personal songs, and it's also a huge fan favorite that sees Earl talking about his relationship with his father. It's probably his most beloved song among fans. Molasses with RZA is an amazing track with one of my favorite beats on an Earl song and a sound that I feel predicts what Earl would do more of in the future. RZA also has a great feature on there as well. There are a couple songs with Tyler the Creator on here as well, and they're both fantastic. Both artists just sound so much more mature than they did on the last Earl project, and both songs are just absolute bangers. This album has an extremely dark tone, which is present on everything Earl has pretty much ever made, and it's a super raw sounding project. There aren't really any songs that I remotely dislike. Everything about it is super solid in my opinion. Earl really proves himself on this album, and it signifies the true start of an incredible discography. In 2015, after releasing the great album that is Doris, Earl would release another absolutely awesome classic, I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. Sorry for swearing. It's just the title of the album. I'm sorry. I don't make up the rules. I'm sorry. This album is a very interesting piece of art. Maybe it's the album cover, but this album feels like Earl's darkest project to me. It starts with one of the most upbeat instrumentals on the album, Huey, which is one of the best songs on the album in my opinion, and that organ is awesome. The second track on the album, Mantra, has a super cool down-tempo guitar beat with a really cool hook of sorts. I don't know if it's a hook, but it's really cool. Something I find super cool about this project is that Earl produced all of it himself. This album has some of Earl's best tracks and beats like Inside and Faucet, and it's very cool to me that he produced all of it. There aren't any features on the top half of the album, but around the end, more people do start to come in. And they don't bring a ton to the project, but they're still very good. I feel like the features on Doris felt a little more involved in the songs, like how Earl, Vince, and Casey trade verses and lines on Hive. But it's a very minor problem, and the features on I Don't Like Shit are still very, very good. Speaking of Vince staples, I believe this album has the last Vince and Earl collab on an Earl project on the last song, Wool, which has an awesome opening verse from Vince. I love how that song just opens with Vince kind of starting his verse and then the piano comes in. Such a cool moment. I love how that came together. This album is probably my second favorite full-length album from Earl, and it's a really incredible project with Earl getting quite personal at times. The same year as I Don't Like Shit, 2015, Earl would release a 10-minute song/EP called Solace, which are some of the greatest 10 minutes of hip-hop I've ever heard. The project has many different sections, and despite only being 10 minutes long, it's a very cohesive project that doesn't feel too short at all. This project is utterly hypnotizing, with some really great looping beats and Earl's signature style of rapping behind the beat that is also pretty unique. The first real beat is probably my favorite on here. Seriously, Earl, what is that sample? It has a really cool guitar part. At least I think that's a guitar, and it's just awesome. The second beat is probably the most popular among fans, and it has a really dark piano part with Earl sounding utterly exhausted with his rapping, almost lifeless. The instrumental passages on here are really, really good too. There's this beat that starts about 4 minutes and 56 seconds in that I absolutely adore. Sadly, Solas isn't on streaming services, which is an absolute shame because I'd say it's my second favorite project from Earl, but it is on YouTube. This is one of the most impressive pieces of hip-hop I've ever heard, with Earl bringing in so many great sounds and ideas in a very short amount of time. If you haven't listened to this project, make that an absolute priority because it's just astounding. You know what? Even if you have listened to this, give it another re-listen because it's just that good. Alright, this is the big one. For as much as I've been gushing, it's about to get insane. In 2018, Earl Sweatshirt released his third full-length studio album, Some Rap Songs. This is one of the greatest pieces of art I have ever experienced. And that's not even half of how much I love this thing. It's a goddamn masterpiece. This album took a while for me to get into, but it's become one of my very favorite albums and a top 2 hip-hop album for me. This album is just unlike anything I've ever heard. The beats are hypnotic and so well produced. Earl's lyrics are incredible, and the whole album is a really interesting representation of depression. Every song on here is pretty much perfect in my eyes, and they flow together so incredibly well. The opening track, Shattered Dreams, starts this album off very well, and it kind of tells you how the whole project will sound. December 24 is definitely a highlight for me, with a really cool and kind of mysterious beat. My favorite song on here, and my favorite Earl song in general, is The Mint, which has a beautiful piano-sampled beat and great verses from Earl and Navy Blue. Songs like The Bends and Azucar are also huge favorites for me, as well as every track on here. Towards the end of the album, the tracks start to get much more experimental, especially with the last 3 songs, Playing Possum, Peanut, and the anthemic closer, Riot. All of which are tracks that stray from the path of the other tracks on the album. Playing Possum has this crazy sample. I absolutely love it. I want to know what that is. And sound bites of Earl's mother and father giving presentations and reciting poetry. Peanut is just so strange. It has this very weird, super glitchy beat, with Earl's flow sounding kind of warped and his delivery just being very drained. And then Riot is one of Earl's most popular songs, but it's totally instrumental. It's pretty much just a sample that was sped up, chopped a little bit, and then he pretty much just put it on the album. It's a very cool end to the album, and it really is a cathartic ending to the album as well. I love Earl's projects before this, but this is the album that makes Earl one of the greatest hip-hop artists of all time for me. Gotta clear my throat. After the insane masterpiece that was Some Rap Songs, Earl released a 15-minute project called Feet of Clay, which came out in 2019. This is probably Earl's weirdest project. Opening with one of his best opening tracks, 74, this project sounds a lot more experimental than Some Rap Songs, and that only intensifies with the next track, East. This track has been the subject of countless jokes and memes because of how astoundingly weird it is. The beat is very confusing, and combined with Earl's rapping, it just sounds almost silly. I don't dislike East like a lot of other people, but I'd say I am definitely very indifferent on it. This project is pretty uneven, containing some of Earl's most polarizing material. This project does have one of Earl's greatest songs he's ever made, El Toro Combo Meal. This track has a perfect beat that sounds so hopeful yet melancholy, and Earl and Mavi give great performances as expected. Aside from a few standout moments, this project isn't very interesting or exciting, but its great moments are great for sure. As of me making this video, Earl has just released his brand new album, Sick. I've been extremely excited for this album, given how much I love Earl's music, and how good the singles for this album have been. So I went into this album with pretty high expectations, and on my first listen, I was a little skeptical. The more trap-influenced production on a few of the songs really threw me off, but upon more listens, I absolutely love it. Opening with the ominous and gritty Alchemist-produced Old Friend, which has a really cool sound to it, and then transitioning very well into the lead single, 2010. This track is pretty insane. The beat produced by Black Noise with that really cool synth lick and punchy drums tied with Earl's amazing rapping makes it a standout track for sure. Vision with Zayloopers is a really good example of the new trap direction I mentioned earlier, and it definitely took a while to grow on me, but I love it now. Lie has a great Alchemist-produced beat that sounds like the collaborations Al and Earl had on Al's This Thing of Ours EP, which I mentioned in my 2021 list video. Lobby is supposed to be an interlude, but I think it definitely stands on its own as a fully fledged track. The album ends with what are probably my two favorite songs on the album, Titanic and Fire in the Hole. The latter has the most beautiful beat on the whole album, and the former is another great trap-influenced track, with an awesome flow from Earl. I am immensely satisfied with this album, and I'm so happy that Earl was able to come back with an absolute banger. Thank you so very, 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 very much for watching this video. Discography reviews are definitely my favorite videos to make, and Earl is an artist that I wanted to do right when I had the idea for the series. I hope to see you again very soon, but until then, have a great day, night, weekend. Life? I don't know what's going on for you, but have a great time until I see you next.